Good morning. Let's start with microphone issues again, because I can't get it to fit, even though, okay, here we go. Please turn with me to Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, as we look at the title, The Pen, the Game, the Hook, and the Trophy, a throwback for me to a time when I stole from another, more experienced preacher who will get the blame for this if it don't go well, but will get credit, God willing, at the end if it does. And he used to teach through object lessons. And as I was a youth minister, I used to teach through object lessons that I now use basically to summarize in words. And so the words this week are the pen, which really goes back to Wednesday, which helps you understand. This will be a little bit of review. The game, the hook, and the trophy will all hopefully come together as illustrations of things I saw from these 7 chapters this week. Understanding that, let's just start out right away saying that the pen has to do with the pen of the scribes. During this time, we've already talked about the way that Jeremiah is living in a time of idolatry, having taken the baton from Isaiah, who spent roughly 10 chapters from about 40 through 50 talking about the way that idolatry had become a thing in Israel. And it's easy to lose track of in this society, so we tried to update and freshen up our perspective on idolatry and how it affects us by saying it simply gives us an opportunity to carve out another narrative of what I would like to believe in. And if that wasn't absolutely clear, it's going to be clear in another few verses, because that's literally what's going on here in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 8, beginning at verse 4. You shall say to them, thus says the Lord, when men fall, do they not rise again? If one turns away, does he not return? Why then has this people turned away in perpetual backsliding? They hold fast to deceit. They refuse to return. I have paid attention and listened, but they have not spoken rightly. No man relents of his evil, saying, what have I done? Everyone turns to his own course, like a horse plunging headlong into battle. For even the stork in the heavens knows her times, the turtle dove, a swallow, and the crane keeps the time of their coming. But my people know not the rules of the Lord. That's the part we read on Wednesday night. Hoping to build on that foundation, verse 8. How can you say we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. The wise men shall be put to shame. They shall be dismayed and taken. Behold, they have rejected the word of the Lord. So what wisdom is in them? Building on the foundation we talked about once again on Wednesday night. We already talked about how the lying pen of the scribes gives us the opportunity to, we don't have to wait on the scribes to do it anymore. We said we can type or Google whatever we'd like to believe into a search bar that can correlate that with something in the Bible that will affirm us in whatever we'd like to think. Building on that foundation, though, the danger of it is something I saw in a story that I heard this week. And I'm talking about rappers an awful lot, but please indulge me one more rapper. As this is a rapper who has passed on, sadly enough, shot in front of his own store. His brother lives on carrying on the family business, however. And he gets to tell the story of how he and his brother grew up. Good parents. They didn't have to go into gang life. The one brother didn't, the one who is still with us. And what he says is they started out in business in a way that one of the brothers who's surviving said, this is a political term now, but he doesn't have the least bit of interest in politics. He said, I knew that my lifestyle was not sustainable. And so I knew that the reason why the police were constantly harassing our successful business is there's some things we were doing that simply weren't consistent with making money in legal ways. And so over time, my brother, the younger brother, stood up and said, we can't keep doing this, but we can find a way to make this money something legitimate. And so the sad part is they actually had made that turn. And they became super famous. The one brother a famous rapper, the other one behind the scenes handling the business as he always did, not needing the limelight. And eventually over time, they became a movement that began to inspire others to put away the disagreements they had been having literally in Los Angeles. And they began to make peace among people who for years, it was what they call on-site. It was no longer on-site in the city of Los Angeles because people were coming together to do business in healthy ways. But eventually what happened is that brother who was becoming popular for making peace ended up being shot, as we said, in front of his own store. And what happened is that was, to me, this week, an illustration of the way in which God is talking about there is a shelf life on what's going on with the pen of the scribes. As some of our young people were wise enough to point out this morning in the young adults class, They asked me a question about Ahab, not really Ahab, David. And why is it that God would send a lying spirit into the mouth of anyone, much less his own people? And ultimately, we said it seems to go back again to that habit, just like he hardened the heart of Pharaoh. It was roughly 5 times the word says he hardened his own heart before God stepped in and said, buddy, we're not going to work on your timeline. I've seen what your heart is going to do, and we're going to keep it right here while I work my plan out. And so it's the same thing with the pen of these scribes. As a king by the name of Ahab had been given a second chance after he had had a man killed, essentially. When Jezebel had Naboth killed for his vineyard, we've talked about it before. Much like David, there was no sacrifice for that. Ahab had to die, but he didn't, because God gave him another chance. And with his second chance, he went back into that same habit of wanting what someone else had. And not just wanting it, going back into that pattern of getting it at any means or by any means necessary, which led him right back into the same path. And enabled on his path were the prophets of the day, which is one of the problems we're going to see with Jeremiah. See, because there was a prophet by the name of Micaiah who was accustomed to telling the truth. And so when they called in for the prophets to be advisors, should we go to war or should we not? With one voice, they seemed to step up and say, let's go. You will be victorious. It's your day, king. My paraphrase, of course. But Jehoshaphat, the king who was being baited into going into war with Ahab, was like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. And so he's like, is there not another prophet of the Lord? Our brother who's visiting this week caught that there's a distinction in the language. One version says Adonai, the other one literally calls him by name. And when Jehoshaphat was calling for the prophet of God, he called God by name to make sure there was no mistake. We're not looking for a prophet of an authority figure. I want to know what God got to say. And there was a distinction because the news was completely different. From the prophet of God, the news was, Ahab, tomorrow you're going to die. But ultimately, that didn't get the prophet any reward other than bread and water rations. Maybe the first lesson is, I say it all the time, there are challenges in your life that are going to require you to take on the burden of bread and water rations in order to please God. You can't please Ahab and God. And you may not be serving an Ahab, but we are all serving someone who is going to put us on bread and water choices that, God willing, we will be able to have. What's the benefit of having each other? We have the strength of knowing that we're not all holding those stories. We know that there's another brother who had a bread and water period he had to go through in his life because he stood on facts. We know that there's another sister who was able to stand strong because she had to go through a bread and water moment, not because she messed up at work, but because she stood on facts. And so it's not brand new for us when we're facing these difficulties, because the whole point of coming together as a group of believers is we've got stories to share about people who lived on bread and water because they stood on facts, right? And so that is what we're seeing here out of Jeremiah. He's like the pen of the scribes. It seems good for a season, but it's not sustainable. And so much like, I call him my brother because I'm not completely sure. The rumor is these two very famous brothers were Church of Christ kids at one point, out of L.A., who entered the gang, left the Church of Christ behind, but it was always in them. Because as they decided to make that turn over and over again in this interview I was listening to, the surviving brother was like, every time I saw an open door out of what I was doing, he's like, that's God. That's God. And he's on a secular platform, still giving credit to God for the fact that he had a chance to get out of whatever it was that he was in. And so whether it was a Church of Christ or not, he was in some church that sticks with him today. And it strengthened him to carry on even though his brother isn't here any longer. They knew it wasn't sustainable. And so he is helping us to understand some of the things that Jeremiah is talking about. The convenient truth may be sustainable for a season, but it's not sustainable forever. And that is what Jeremiah is saying. It's worth spending that time in the cistern. Another bread and water punishment. Jeremiah's version of bread and water was having to live in a cistern. But like we've said it before, there are days of woe that come to us as believers that look like they're the condemnation that God has placed on the wicked. But understand what that cistern ended up being for Jeremiah. It ended up being a hiding place when Babylon came through and leveled everything they saw. And guess who saved him out of the cistern? It was one person who thought it was right to, or not right to put him in the cistern in the first place, along with the Babylonians. Once they dug him out, they could have killed him, couldn't they? They could have carted him off. They left Jeremiah there. God allowed the evil that was done to Jeremiah to hide him until the judgment had passed. And so that's hopefully, God willing, a fresh perspective on things that, God willing, another advantage of taking on those bread and water moments is because God sees the pending destruction that's coming, whether it's in the form of a great calamity that affects us all or just something in your life. that we talked about, land of Goshen, he can hide you from if you're willing to let God fight for you. If you're willing to let God fight for you, because we said it before, if I fight for myself, he's like, go on, buddy, do you. And reap the consequences of trying to take care of yourself on your terms. But if you trust me, eat the bread and water for a while, that bread and water might be super tasty in a few months when everybody's wishing they had bread and water. As we go on, beyond talking about the pen, in Jeremiah chapter 9, we'll get a chance to see the game. This is a long reading, y'all. Hopefully, please be patient with me. 1 through 9 of Jeremiah 9 as we talk about the game. Verse 1 of chapter 9. Oh, that my head were waters and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had in the desert a traveler's lodging place, that I might leave my people and go away from them. For they are all adulterers, a company of treacherous men. They bend their tongue like a bow. Falsehood and not truth has grown strong in the land. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they do not know me, declares the Lord. Let everyone beware his neighbor and put no trust in any brother. For every brother is a deceiver, and every neighbor goes about as a slanderer. Everyone deceives his neighbor, and no one speaks the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies. I'm going to read that again. They have taught their tongue to speak lies. They weary themselves committing iniquity, heaping oppression upon oppression and deceit upon deceit. They refuse to know me, declares the Lord. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will refine them and test them. For what else can I do? Because of my people. Their tongue is a deadly arrow. It speaks deceitfully. With his mouth each speaks peace to his neighbor, but in his heart he plans an ambush for him. Shall I not punish them for these things? Declares the Lord. Shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? The thing that stood out to me this week isn't the fact that we've heard these things before, because this, in a lot of ways, it's like a final exam. It's like a summary of so many things we've seen in bits and pieces of Isaiah and Jeremiah up to this point. I'm not going to beat the dead horse, but please do not overlook this passage because I'm choosing not to really preach it, because this is a preachable chapter. Trust me. You can do a series on this chapter. Please, on your own time, look over it, because there are very serious implications for what we call the practical side of Christianity. So God willing, there's no mystery. We're headed toward the Beatitudes. When you want to see a deeper view of what he's warning us about that is really blessed in the Beatitudes, the flip side is talked about more in depth in chapters like this. So don't be like, whew, he didn't do it today. Look at it on your own time, because it's preacher hack. We've got another preacher here. So we've got a real preacher here today. So I'm about to say, shout out to Wade Purdom, who is here with us visiting from Boundary Waters Church of Christ up north. Had time to spend, the pleasure of spending time with Wade as he basically did a baptism here not long ago, back in May, for a brother who he had to eulogize not long ago. So I appreciate the brother because he gave great contribution in class. And over the time I've gotten to know him, he and his wife, who was a missionary, they were missionaries in China. They've been a blessing just in the short time, and Sharita as well. Another, for the rest of our PKs, preachers' kids, we got extra preachers' kids here today. And so I mention all that because they've been a great blessing. And so when I'm talking from the whole concept of preacher hacks, there's sometimes I skip over things because you don't have to beat the dead horse. I've talked about it before. As a youth minister, sometimes the best thing, was a young person who got it so I could shut up and they could talk the same good news that they were no longer hearing from me. And so when I don't hammer an issue, it's an opportunity for you to look and understand a deeper reason why God is giving you simple warnings in the Beatitudes. That's this chapter. What I want to focus on is the whole concept of the game. Review for folks who've heard me in Pullman before. I might not have mentioned it. Well, got to give another shout out. All right, we have new students from the U of I who got the pleasure to know while I was at Idaho. And the good thing about growth is my brother now has his sister here at the U of I, and so we get the pleasure of having additional visitors. Not that I'm ignoring everybody else. I don't know everybody, but these are folks who I know. I don't recognize you, so thank you. And everybody else who's visiting with us as well. But the good news is that there is a time when you have to, or you have the privilege to stop talking because other people are picking up those points from you. And the common thing that you have the thing you have in common is you're speaking from the Word of God. So you get a break at a time when other people are stepping in to help out. The problem with the game, though, is this. If you've heard me at Pullman before, and I've talked about this, is it's one thing for me to sin and for my conscience to be intact. And there's something that bothers me about what I'm doing. Even if it's not just a flat-out sin, I just know I could do better. I need that thing still working in me. Because one of the most dangerous things in life is when sin begins to become fun. Because at that point, it goes into that illustration of the hook. That is when Satan is beginning to not set a hook. See, because if you've been fishing, setting a hook is nothing. If I want to catch and release that day, I set the hook. I might hurt the fish a little bit. He gets to go as long as he hasn't swallowed the hook. At the point at which he swallowed the hook, I can't do a whole lot more for him other than to cook him up if he's cookable. Because swallowing the hook means it's a wrap. And that's what's happening when doing wrong becomes fun. And that's not to say sin never fun. No, it's always fun. But it's not so much that the sinning or the thing that I'm doing becomes fun. It's the fact that I'm doing wrong. At that point, that's when it's super dangerous. That's when Satan has me swallowing the hook. Because those endorphins are now being connected to a pattern of doing dirt. And that is what God is saying. Here is the hook that comes in verse 9. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? See, they're in a time when they no longer believe it's punishment. Because how do you get the fun if it's always hurting? You don't get the fun if every time I'm doing something there's pain attached to it. Electrical fence much? I mean, maybe maybe you can over time develop, but you got to touch it a lot in order to overcome the natural pain that goes along with touching something that hurts. And that's the point. He never wants us to get to the point where we become either numb to it or becomes fun to do wrong, because the reason the shock is there is to keep us from something that's much more dangerous. And that is where Israel is at this point. We already saw last week how he said, look, you literally witnessed what I did to Israel. Are you not connecting the dots? That you're not my favorites? You just have a chance not to walk that same road. And that's where we're at right now. But something about it became so fun that they forgot the consequences came attached to it. And that's why, I won't say my friend, the brother I heard speaking this week, it was so important. Because after his brother began to make legal money, what killed him? What killed him? If I gave his name, some of you might know. It wasn't some enemies from another set or from another clique. It was the same gang he had always been a part of. The same people who used to ride out to do dirt with turned on him. And they got one of them, like we said, to commit the act. And so ultimately what that helped me see is no matter how far I come back or make a recovery from the things that I've done, there are some things I never truly make a full comeback recovery from. Why? The wages of sin is, thank you. And we all got to die. It don't mean that everybody gets the same penalty, but I don't have to, God willing, go so far down a path that there's no point of return for the consequences that God has for me. He said, like we said before, by the measure I use, God will measure it back to me. And that's what our young, I believe, brother found out the hard way, that even after he made his turn, after he had led the kind of life that led many, I believe, to Christ, not just to making money, he still had to pay the price out of the very machine that he fed. It came back to haunt him and ultimately kill him. And that is what God is saying here. Shall I not punish? We never want the game. They call it the game for a reason, right? That's slang for underhanded business, organized crime. They call it the game because there really is a level of it that connects to your endorphins. Oh, and I wish I was just talking about gang life, but you know life too. There are some times when just the fact that, I didn't get caught, there's a euphoria that just comes with not having to go get locked up, not even just not getting locked up. Just living one more day where people don't know. You don't want to get comfortable there. Because eventually the things, the habits that were stacking up, they come back around. And ultimately that's what God is trying to get the people prepared for. Shall I not punish is the question he's asking after he lists all these things. As you go back during your week and you read this list for yourself, being like, whew, he didn't hammer that one. Say like, God, please, don't let me miss verse 9. If I got a memory verse for this week, maybe let it be verse 9. Shall he not punish the kinds of things that he is saying need to stop on this list? As we go on to chapter 11, to talk a little bit more about the hook. and talk a little bit more about the hook. As verse 14 of chapter 11 is really a series of verses that talk about the same thing within about 10 chapters of Jeremiah. Very sobering verse in verse 14 of chapter 11 as he has begun to break the bad news to Jeremiah that as much of a soft heart as Jeremiah might have, God is giving him a command this time. Where verse 14 says, therefore do not pray for this people or lift up a cry or prayer on their behalf, for I will not listen when they call to me in the time of their trouble. Please turn back with me to chapter 7 verse 16. Chapter 7, my Bible has titled, Evil in the Land. Where verse 16 says, as for you, do not pray for this people or lift up a cry for them, and do not intercede with me, for I will not hear you. Something we'll see next week. Won't preach it next week, but it's in next week's set of chapters in chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 11. Taking us back to something we saw in Isaiah 58 about true and false fasting. Verse 11. The Lord said to me, do not pray for the welfare of this people. Though they fast, I will not hear their cry, and though they offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them, but I will consume them by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. Understand one of the reasons, we say it all the time, why God says, treat one another with love and kindness. Go back to that picture that we have in the Revelation, the souls under the altar. They are offering up prayers for, God forgive them, for they knew not what they do. No, like, God, how long before vengeance? See, sometimes I lose in the Beatitudes in Jesus' kindness, that kindness somehow goes on forever. There's a shelf life on that, because he's hearing souls up under the altar that have been martyred and are crying out for vengeance. And God's answer is, no, don't pray for, no. He's like, I got you. And it's one of those rare moments in the Bible where you get to see the answer in the very next set of verses. He's telling Jeremiah, stop praying for them. Why? He's going to say, why? Because you don't know what they got planned for you. Back to chapter 11. Verse 18. The Lord made it known to me, and I knew. Then you showed me their deeds. But I was like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not know it was against me they devised their scheme, saying, let us destroy the tree with its fruit. Let us cut him off from the land of the living, that his name be remembered no more. Think Jeremiah going to still be happy after that? No. There are times in life when God is telling us to stop doing something that seems nice. It seems like the thing he told us to do. You told me to love my enemies, God. Why are you keeping me from being able? If I showed you the rest, I would need to hold you back. Lock you in your house and keep you from. And so understand, God, we have trouble understanding who he is. Because like it said, we heard in Isaiah, I think it was Isaiah, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My ways are higher than your ways, declares the Lord. And understand, he's saying basically the same thing that young man talking about his brother, him, the one spared. I can't say it was definitely because he stayed out of the gang while his brother was in it, but he's the one who's living. He's talking about the way in which they knew their lifestyle wasn't sustainable. And so likewise, Jeremiah is being told to stop praying for people who were locked in a pattern of life that was not sustainable. And so ultimately, as we go to, let's stop in chapter 13 maybe before we go back to the Beatitudes. Chapter 13. The reason is, as we had brought up in the young adults class, is there's a point at which God turns. There's a point at which God turns away from the kindness and the mercy and the love that we hear about into something else. He's usually called the Old Testament God at this point, but he's really the same God. He doesn't change. Ultimately, we just have to have, God willing, a deeper understanding of when he's happy and merciful and forgiving, and stop trying to rewrite his forgiveness on the stuff we just won't do. Let me say it again. I'll take the southern out of it. Stop trying to write his forgiveness on stuff I just want to do. And that's the danger of the scribe of the pens. Like we said before, we have so many teachers now that we don't have to we don't have to go to temple to have somebody find the excuses for us. As long as I can get online, Google something that sounds clever, and then, right, brother, assign my particular unique spin on it, then that's doctrine for me now. It's easy to create. but it doesn't sustain you, as he's talking about here. What God turns on is the actual objective truth that exists, not the one that I can create. Verses 15 and forward. Verse 15, hear and give ear. Be proud, for the Lord has spoken. Give glory to the Lord your God before he brings darkness, before your feet stumble on the twilight mountains. And while you look for light, he turns it into gloom and makes it into deep darkness. Understand, that's a pattern. That's a pattern. I talked about it in the short lesson. Nadab and Abihu much? How did Eli rebuke his sons when they began to use the office of priest for their own personal gain? He's like, look, it's one thing if you have done wrong to a brother or a sister. God will intercede for you. But what happens when you realize the things that you have been doing have actually been representing a turn on God? At that point, there is no one to intercede for you. But the same God who has been giving you mercy is now poised to turn on you. We said it this way. There are times in life when I confuse the grace to turn with the grace to continue or to keep going along a dangerous path. And why do I say that? Because as we go to the book of Matthew, to the Beatitudes, where our brothers started the reading, like we talk about, there are times when God is giving us depth. He's giving us a deeper understanding of what it is that he's calling us to do. And even though the Beatitudes themselves can be little short, wise statements that can be sometimes difficult to understand if you don't have kind of a hyperlink to stories that give you a better understanding, sometimes the Beatitudes themselves are giving you the depth of understanding. Why? Because of the trophy. We're living in a time when, a few years ago, the whole concept of participation trophies, that was, you give people a participation trophy? What's going on there? I mean, no, sorry. If we got folks who get participation trophies, there's nothing wrong with that at a certain age. As adults, however, that's not sustainable. So while you're in your younger years and you get participation trophies, please don't tell coach or mom or dad, the preacher said I can't get another. No, get that, because it encourages you to participate until you can develop skills. However, ain't nobody giving me a pat on the back for participation anymore. I'm 50-something. So God willing, I had to let the participation trophies go a while ago. And when I mess up, I got to get better. I didn't like last week with that. I don't know. People were nice. Could have been better. I don't want a participation trophy for last week. I want you to genuinely be blessed by what you hear. And so when I mess up, I want to try at least try to bounce back, right? And so ultimately what we're hearing here from God is the same thing as we say for everybody. Whether you preach or not, you're living a life. And somebody said it similar today. I say it all the time, but they said it a different way. I'd rather see a sermon than hear a sermon any day. That's the Beatitudes. See, we understand why participation trophies can be, because they water down the significance of a legitimate accomplishment. And so as believers, the Beatitudes are setting forth for you higher level principles. That if you are actually doing these things, why would you want to get the same reward as somebody who is literally checked out and simply saying they are a believer? James himself said it. The demons believe and shudder, but they're not working the works of God. These are the works of God. He's telling you when you're blessed. I'm going to take them backwards a little bit. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Can I really be blessed as one of his peacemakers if I'm constantly going back to the sources of conflict? Not as a peacemaker, but I'm just hovering there. Understand, I'm not trying to, look, I wrote one of my old teammates this week. I wrote him, I'm like, brother, I've been using you as an illustration for an apology that I have not given. I'm embarrassed to tell this story. Folks at Pullman, if they already know it though. When I was playing football, we had a guy who wrote a letter to the football team. And he came out. I mean, like out the closet. And so we've been changing around to do this back before the current movement. And we're like, who is it? And so we're a little bit heated. We're in a relatively progressive college, so we're not heated like we're going to do anything. But we would have liked to have known. And so as we're starting to, talk about this issue, not preacher Marcus, who's always talking about how we need to go to each other with our problems, I'm sitting in the library talking to one of my boys from the football team. And I'm like, I think it's so-and-so. Because and I gave all my math, and it was all wrong. Because guess who it was? The dude I was talking to. I am still connected with him this day on social media because it's not funny for the dude I call it out for. So I'm trying to give this brother an apology. I'll go, you an apology. You just got it now. Just click on the sermon, bro. You got it. And so that's one of the reasons. I don't say these things as somebody who's never gossiped. No. I say it because I know if I'm really taking the responsibility I need to step up to everybody I've said something wrong about, I get tired of that. I didn't even want to go to preaching school. Why? Because I was in front of a preacher, did a great job, made me feel comfortable going in front and confessing. We don't out front and confess down south, right? I felt comfortable, but I got tired of going down front. It just got old because I was still going down front right before I was shipping off to preaching school. I was like, this is tired. And so that's one of the reasons when I preach these things, it's not as somebody who has no history in saying things I don't like behind somebody's back. It's because I just know it's not sustainable. And even if I haven't overcome it, I understand the need to turn from it because I know how destructive it is. You think I got an answer back right away from that brother who I defended? No, I'm waiting to see if he'll answer because you can't undo that damage right away. If he never writes me back, they're like, oh, that's your problem. No! I'm part of the reason for that hurt. And I am forever linked to him as much as God might forgive me to those words I uttered with a half-truth and a motor mouth. And so when he's talking about blessed are the peacemakers, we have a responsibility. As our brother was talking about, we are in a time where there's absolutely nothing miraculous about those of us who think alike all getting together, especially during these charged political times, and talking about how right we are. The world does that all the time. I've talked about this before. What's miraculous in that? He is talking about blessed are the people who can bring healing in those situations. That's where he begins to see who's different and who's really walking according to his ways. Sometimes you just get to take a long ride with folks who don't always agree with you on everything. And that gives you the opportunity to say some things, God willing, that can bring some healing. But that doesn't happen if all I'm ever doing is running to my side and simply getting affirmed, right? And that's why I appreciate what our brother is talking about. You don't back down from this. I don't have you as an illustration if you just go on about your way. I have you for an illustration because you decided to step up and say something that mattered. And God willing, we can use that to be different, right? And that's the thing. Churches are getting their name dragged all over this country. Why? Because they're falling in line with the divisions. They aren't doing anything unique for the most part, right? They look just like everybody else. We talked about it before, right? And so ultimately, you want to let your light shine? Start doing these in place of what we are all being herded into during this season of moving up to November, whatever. Glad I don't know which date it is, but I would start confessing even more. Where's Rick at? Rick's back there. I told Rick after small group one day, ask Rick if you want to know what I feel about politics. So I'm going to leave it for another time. Another brother, we don't agree on a whole lot. But he came up to me after small group one day. And the best part of small group, not being mean to the rest of the small group, it was a great day. My favorite part of the day was I got to talk to that brother about politics. Because we don't agree. But I think I left at least feeling closer to him than I did at any other point in our relationship. Have the tough conversations. But have them with this assumption. I might not be right. Right? And ultimately, I believe if we have the courage to have the tough conversations and then not have them, as the Bible literally says, don't engage one another for the point of debate. Engage one another because I might not know exactly what to say because I don't know you. But what I do know is the God who does know you. And insofar as you are willing to be my brother, God willing, I'm willing to be your brother or... No, I can't be your sister. You're willing to be my sister or brother. Y'all know. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm willing to be family for you, right? Then God is the one. That's where the Holy Spirit kicks in. See, because no matter whether the sermon goes well on any particular day, words aren't going to be enough to change hearts. God is the one who knows how to change a heart. And to the degree I get deluded about the fact that I can say something that'll just change your life forever, it's not going to last for long if God's not in it. And so ultimately, it becomes a little bit less difficult to have those conversations when I go into them understanding that my words aren't going to heal them the way that God will heal them. And so I wasn't even planning to go this route exactly, But God willing, as we go forward and we look at the whole concept, the whole concept of, I'll look at it right now. What was it? The pen, the game, the hook, and the trophy. God willing, we are not the kind of people who will settle for participation awards in Christianity. Understanding that anybody can go, show up, put your name on a roll, say some words, get dipped in the water, right? And have that be a participation award. Because everybody around you, well, if you do all the right things, you check all the right boxes, you show up at the right times, they're going to be like, good fellowship, right? But what does God say about my award? Because that's literally the metaphor he uses for what we get at the end of a life well lived. Please, God, don't let our participation trophies keep us away from the legitimate trophies you promised us, not just in the life after, but in the stories like the story of that young man who, even though he doesn't live with us, his work lives on through his brother who remembers his foundation in Christ. And every time God opens a door for him to get out of the life he used to live, when he sees it, he says that's God. May God deliver us from the temptation of being so desperate for participation trophies that we never get trophies as genuine Christians, his disciples, as we together stand and sing.